Hey, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining the stream. Just pulling up my my camera. It looks like there's some type of thing going on with it. Hold on one. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Awesome. Thank you very much for joining the stream. We have I think 4 or 5 games lined up for this morning. It looks like we have four in an opening preparation. We were interested in looking at the Dutch opening. Dutch opening is interesting, and yeah, we can jump. We can start off with the Dutch opening prep. I think that might be a good way to go about the order of these lessons. But yeah, so the things that I wanted to cover out of the Dutch opening. I used to play the Dutch opening for a bit. Hey, welcome, Jack. Thank you very much for joining the stream. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, it's going well, I think. Yeah, it's a nice day in New York, and I'm yeah, ready to keep working on this. Yeah, I was going to look at the Dutch opening. So the Dutch opening has a few different concepts. For anyone who hasn't spent a lot of time learning the Dutch, Dutch is D4 F5. That's how this is defined. I don't know. Yeah, no, for sure. The queen side is difficult in the Dutch. You also can run into some very quick attacks on the king side as well. I'll show you one crazy line. You know, the highest rated person that I've ever played over the board is Verusian Akobian from Southern California, and he's like 2,700 plus. And I was lucky enough to play like a game in 60 against him, just at some random small tournament in Southern California, and basically I played the Leningrad Dutch and just got totally it just basically got like beaten very badly very quickly out of the Leningrad Dutch against this h4 line. This h4 line is wild. So knight takes h5, rook takes h5, pawn takes h5, e4. And basically white has all of the attack here. I think in terms of overall eval, this is going to be like slightly better for white. But this is a wild line out of the Leningrad Dutch. And it basically plays out... Yeah, I played a Kobian who's like 2,700 or so. It was I think he's the highest rated person I've ever played over the board. It's either him or one of the New York GMs, but... this is one that was particularly memorable to me, and this was one where, yeah, no. So I was lucky enough to play him. It's always cool when you play such a high-rated opponent. I mean, you basically, you kind of adjust your expectations. But I was probably like 2,000, 2,100 at the time, and he played this opening against me, and this is when I was playing over the board Leningrad Dutch. But basically, it demonstrated something that was kind of interesting in this Leningrad Dutch. You basically can sack this rook, and with a close enough, yeah, with basically a aggressive enough attacking from white, that rook sacrifice can be justified. So this is pretty wild. We can look at the openings. There's actually a fair amount of theory here. I mean, there's like 17 games, but this gets really dangerous, and I learned that firsthand. So. This isn't the line that we played. I played a line in which I played like d6 and then king f7. But this is actually main line, which is kind of crazy. I mean, this isn't like it's not as if it's an inferior line for white or it's an overly aggressive attack for white. It's actually fully justified from an eval standpoint. That's what's so crazy about this. So here, h4, knight f6, h5, knight takes, rook takes, pawn takes. And the eval still has white up here, which is crazy. I mean, it's not a yeah, but it's not it's not basically a fundamental opening line. It's I mean, it's not a fundamental opening line, but it actually has no refutation. This is a good eval for white. So, anyways, this is like, what do you do here? E4, bishop g7. Knight h4, castles maybe? Castles or e6? I mean, you sort of need more space for your king. I would look at d6, but I guess the eval indicates that that's wrong, probably just because queen takes h5, king d7, e6. But overall, this is going to end up being, pretty bad for black. So I'm thinking along the lines of like, yeah, e6, castles, whatever. But this is this is just generally pretty dangerous for black. I wanted to cover a few other lines in the Dutch, but I wanted to show that one off in particular, just in case people weren't aware of that line. It can be pretty dangerous. So knight f6, g3, g6, bishop g2, bishop g7. This is a much more standard Leningrad Dutch. I wanted to prepare you for the most aggressive line. The most aggressive line being one in which white can actually, still have a positive eval. But yeah, this is much more what the Leningrad Dutch, tends to look like. In the Leningrad Dutch, you have an extremely closed position. There's a lot of maneuvering with the knights, castling on the king side, and d5, d5, c6, that kind of stuff, and also e6 potentially. Hey, welcome, attacker! Thank you very much for joining the stream. But yeah, so here I guess I would just say, lines like d5, c6, knight d7. In general, black ends up in a pretty solid place. It's difficult for white to really break through this. He has a positive eval, but it will require kind of sophisticated maneuvering from white to break through this wall of pawns and pieces for black. So here, castles, c4, d6. I prefer the lines with e6 and d5, but okay, d6 here, sure. Knight c3, and then basically in this structure where you have the d6 structure, you're trying to play for a break on e5. And then basically black will have a relatively complete center. c6 might need to come before e5, but we can go through the lines and take a look. But the idea here is e5 or e6 here. Knight a6, rook b1, bishop d7, knight d4, and now like c5 or c6, sure. But basically, this is a closed game. White has spatial advantage, but doesn't really have a clear ability to break through in any real place. I'd take a look at knight c5 maybe. C6 is what's recommended by the engine, but I'd play like rook b8 or c6. This will leave white with a small advantage, but nothing that white can't, nothing that black can't handle with accurate play. Overall, it's a surprisingly solid opening. I also want to take a look at the lines out of the non-Leningrad Dutch. So knight g3, knight f6. There's some kind of transpositional possibilities here. G6 is Leningrad, most common. E6 is a less common Dutch line, but also very playable. Here, d7, the bishop moves to e7 as opposed to g7. The pawn stays on g7, and d5 gets played, almost 100% of the games. D5 will probably come next. I guess d6 is also, an idea. But basically, black castles kingside and aims for advancement on d5 or potentially d6 and e5. But basically, comes up with this large kind of center and has frequently has this backwards e pawn, but that's not really much of a liability since it's so inaccessible. The only way that e6 pawn can get attacked is by things like knight g5. Otherwise, you're pretty much good. Yeah, the king is safe. The king is surprisingly safe. Other than the really aggressive lines from white, the Dutch, I think, I mean, I think it is, it does potentially open you up to attack, but the attacks, if you know them, are not that, I don't think they're particularly scary. You just need to sidestep like the first 6 moves, the one that I opened on, like that opening line, rook takes h5, knight takes h5, rook takes h5. Those things are the things that can create big vulnerabilities for black in the Dutch. If you can sidestep the extremely aggressive stuff in the opening, you end up being able to transpose it into a reasonably, a big center and a reasonably solid game, positioning game. But yeah, early bishop g5 can be tricky. E4 can be. Yeah, e4 can be problematic, although e4 is usually covered by f5 and d5. I always played the pawn structures that involved both f5 and d5. We can go back here and look at ones that don't have that. But here, like, e5 is pretty well covered. Knight c3, queen e8, b3, and and the push here is basically going to be on e5 as opposed to basically the pawn advance is going to be e5. The center is going to be built off of e5 and f5, hopefully. Basically, one of the big things in the Dutch main line with d5 is that the push is still e5, but it's e5 to correct a backwards pawn as opposed to a pawn that is, as opposed to this e6 pawn here, which is not fully backwards. Um, uh, Possibly. That's an interesting thing. I don't know about that, if that's true, attacker, but I definitely believe that that's possible. I would like to see d4, f5, e4. And actually, let's take a look at that line. That line is also a dangerous one for black. Basically, this allows white to get a pretty early aggressive attack. One of the big tricks in this particular line is situations in which the pawn on d5 ends up hanging. I'll try to play a line where that happens, but d5 here is an error. So d5, bishop takes f6, e takes f6, queen h5, g6, queen takes d5. This is also a key error that you need to avoid if you're playing the Dutch lines here. So there's a number of, one of the things that I don't like about the Dutch is that it does require learning some pre-made lines for white. This is one of them. You need to be careful to not hang the d5 pawn to the d5 in the d5 e4 structure. Ideas for preventing that, so bishop takes, e takes, queen h5, g6, queen takes, and white's way up. White's up a pawn, and this e5 this e4 pawn becomes a liability. And if you play queen takes queen, knight takes queen, and forks the f6 and c7 pawns, it's a rough game to play. Other ideas here: d4, f5, e4, Staunton Gambit. No, Fischer Random is cool. I like Fischer Random as a general game. I mean, it basically, I feel like I'm relatively good at it in the sense that, it forces you to play, basically play chess, which is the phrase that the grandmasters use, but basically play a game that isn't based on preparation from the very beginning. I like Fischer Random. I think Fischer Random's a great game. I wish there was more of it, and I wish there was maybe like a more solid rating system for it. But yeah, I think overall it's Fischer Random is a great game. But I also have a bias because I'm not someone who's huge on opening preparation. Which is great that I get to teach opening preparation now. It gives me an opportunity to catch up on a lot of stuff that I don't know. But yeah, Fischer Random can be Fischer Random can definitely be a good game to play. Very good at developing tactical and positional principles. So yeah, f takes c4, knight c3, and ideas like knight f6, bishop g5. And here, I guess, I don't know, you play knight c6, but this is rough. I mean, you're giving back the pawn no matter what. Granted, giving back the e-pawn is better than giving up a d-pawn. If you give up the d-pawn, you end up with double isolated pawns on the e-file. So this is probably a better line. But overall, this opening can be very problematic and is a line that you must be familiar with if you want to comfortably play the Dutch. A way to fix these types of things, play the Dutch 100 games in Blitz online, and every time you get a bad opening position, go through and do the check against the opening book theory, or the opening book theory and the eval. Like I was taking a look at in yesterday's lesson, but I think basically this ends up being a pretty solid opening if you can get out of the first 8 moves or so. If you can sidestep and know all of the potential opening pitfalls, like the early opening pitfalls, it ends up being a pretty solid position with black getting into a complicated positioning game with a big center. Very interesting stuff. Thank you very much for the suggestion on it. The question was, is the Dutch underrated? You make a good point about that Alpha Zero line. I'm gonna have to take a look at that myself. I'm not familiar with that happening, but as a general opening line, the Dutch plays out pretty well if you can get out of the really dangerous pieces of theory. Of course, there is that line that I started off with, the rook takes h5 line, which offers white a positional advantage, or which basically offers white a positional advantage large enough to offset the sacrifice of the rook for the knight. But yeah, I've played it. I think it's a pretty good opening. It lets you set up a very closed, complicated opening or middle game position. Can be a little bit drawish as well, if you can get to the middle game. But overall, I've won some good games with it. I think it's pretty solid. I think it's an interesting idea for Black to play. So yeah, overall good game, interesting. And yeah, thank you very much for the suggestion to play it, or to review it. If anyone else has any opening suggestions or games, feel free to send some. We have opening slots basically open slots for lessons or lesson ideas as early as tomorrow during the 6:05 p.m. Eastern stream. Feel free to send over some, it really doesn't have to be your games. Game analysis is cool, but also just general ideas. For example, in this May 12th 6:05, we're going to look at the Queen D8 Scandinavian, and we're going to look at some semi-Slav structures. Big picture, I'm thinking that we might want to move more towards doing broader lessons as opposed to game analysis. But I'm very happy to do both. So if you want to take a look and submit games or ideas for lessons on the Discord, feel free to. We'll get them in as early as tomorrow evening, and then really fill out the schedule, and I can do more prep if I get more suggestions for lessons ahead of time. With many of these things, we're just sort of scratching the surface, but if we keep doing the same opening concepts over and over, we can go into deeper and more complicated lines. So yeah, overall, please send your ideas for lessons, or please send your games. And we'll give them a slot and put them on the stream. I really appreciate you guys being here. I really appreciate you guys sending the time to, taking the time to watch and to contribute material and ideas. And yeah, I think really, I'm very happy to do whatever you guys think is the most helpful, including look into to theory and advanced concepts that you'd like to see explored. Anyways, we're going to move on to the game analysis from here. The first game that I got, 1 second. Sure. Yeah, no, we can definitely try that. I'll put in a slot for tomorrow, or for May 13th, to take a look at some GM games. The issue with GM games is that they can often, involve very complicated concepts. I feel like I can't do justice to a GM game in a 15-minute game, in a 15-minute time slot. I feel like I would end up misexplaining things. But they're very high-level things, and the best way to design, the best way to analyze them is by asking the players themselves. But yeah, I can definitely do, take a look at well-executed games. I mean, when we were learning the King's Indian defense, it was helpful to look over some of Nakamura's winning games out of that. But yeah, we can take a look at that. I mean, yeah, there's certainly some truth to that attacker. I mean, I wouldn't pretend to be a grandmaster. Grandmasters are very high level, and I think it's a little bit ridiculous. It's a little bit ridiculous to. I mean, I'm a master, and I feel like I can't do justice to analyzing a grandmaster games. So, I would say that it kind of draws a question of how much value can one add as an amateur player against drawing a trying to do analysis of a grandmaster game, right? I mean, I'm happy to take a look at it, but I do feel like I can run out of I can run a bit out of my depth doing that. I can take a look and try to do my best. There's certainly parts of the theory that yeah, no, I completely agree. I think all free chess content is good. I think it's all great. I mean, St. Louis Chess Club, I definitely think they add a lot of value. So, I guess the question is, why? I guess my question is, why do, amateur level lessons exist if that material? You're posing a very good point. Why do amateur level lessons exist if that material is free and available? Very good point. I think I'm offering something a little bit different in that I'm doing an interactive live lesson. But it's a really interesting question because, obviously there are many amateur lessons being given, right? And you're making good points about what's available for free. So why do those exist? In your I'm looking for a response along your line of thinking. Anyways, it's a very very good point that you're making, and I in general agree with it. Anyways, I'm very happy to incorporate that into the stream. I can take a look at Grandmaster games, particularly ones that are instructive. But you make excellent points about the availability of free lessons, and I really want to give credit and attention to that point. Because I think it is a valid one for sure. You're saying that St. Louis Chess Club offers, St. Louis Chess Club offers a lot of free material. I agree, and I think that's great. Yeah, excellent. Anyways, cool. Yeah, I think speedrun is good. Look, at the end of the day, any material that is, ask a really good question, Jack Mac. I think any material that is free and available is excellent. Really makes me happy. I think, things are going to head in that direction, and hopefully quickly. I think basically that, free lessons are really something that's great, that's available, and that videos can be done live stream. I try to make this lesson personalized. I am here live, so I think I can do a lesson live and have the aspects of having a free lesson where you guys can ask questions and I can answer them. But yeah, I think any free chess analysis is great because I think that chess is one of those things that can very easily be done, to people without, regardless of background or resource situation. Chess lessons are frequently expensive, and in my mind, they don't have to be. So you guys keep asking these questions, yeah. No. I mean, no, I think it's really good points. So speedrun style, awesome. As long as the videos are free, I'm in favor of it. And basically, any free chess material is really the point. If provided that the speedruns are free and provided that they are a legitimate way to help people learn, then yeah, I'm super in favor of it. But yeah, no, all of that stuff. Really, at the end of the day, the goal is to make sure that everyone can play chess regardless of background. And it can be done, as efficiently as possible. That's what I'm going for. Don't mean to get on my soapbox, but I think, yeah, there's too much time spent discussing what I'm not doing. Yeah, well, look, I mean, suggest the things that I'm not doing, and I'll do them. But yeah, yeah, it's great. Anyways, the main point is I want to make chess lessons free and available to everyone. And to make sure that everyone knows that option exists. I think it's the best option. I think it's something that will be very helpful, and I really appreciate you guys being here and contributing material and ideas for the stream. But you've asked a very specific question. I think the free speedrun lectures are great. Definitely take a look at those if they're free and available. Awesome ideas. Grandmasters can give great free insights. Make sure that you capitalize on that. Cool. So the next game is this one from Lee Chess. I'll bring it in. Here we go. And cool. It's one out of the English. I think this might have been one that Tarash sent in. And yeah, let's look. Tarash's game starts off with an early c4 against e5 and then b6. This specific line, reversed Sicilian variation, that's an interesting definition. It has some difference between. It basically has some difference between the Sicilian dragon has basically the g6 pawn moving. I don't know. I guess the reverse Sicilian variation would involve the b3 pawn moving. I don't know exactly why it's called the reverse Sicilian, but I know that b6, in terms of how commonly it's played, is fairly far down on this list relative to other moves here. Putting this bishop on the diagonal is an important thing to do. It basically it is a common characteristic of the English to have fianchettoed bishops. B3 is b3, bishop b2 is common. G3, bishop g2 is common. That is where the bishops develop in the English the most naturally, I think. But anyways, this b6 this early is generally pretty pretty unusual. Usually black makes more direct attempts on the center. Anyways, knight c6, g3, d5, c takes, knight takes, bishop g2, and basically white's got a pretty solid it's a pretty solid position. This, I guess, I'm a little bit surprised that the eval is not better for white here. But I think, following basic principles, this is going to turn into a game with a slight white initiative and a solid situation. Anyways, early b6. This will provide a larger eval edge to white. This is basically a slow analysis, or basically, kind of a slow way for black to play. b6 is not a challenging move for white. White can play either e4 or knight f3 or d4. And basically, white will be in a good position here. This is, solid. How does the game continue? How does white best exploit this space advantage, this center control that he's getting? Good question. Okay, so d4, e4, knight f3. Knight f3, knight c6, d4. I think basically white's going to be in a pretty good place at the end of this. I mean, black steered into a direction in which the eval moves against him, and it's not a common move. Yesterday we went over kind of a novel strategy. I don't know how novel it is, but it kind of my strategy, the strategy that I'm sort of thinking about, which is how do you improve your opening repertoire? And in this situation, I would say that b6 basically fails the it fails the opening test. The idea was basically anytime that you're getting a bad position out of the opening, what I think you should do is plug the position into a computer, and then look at what basically stems out of that position. And here, basically black has a series of moves, and when he plays b6, the eval shifts very quickly against him. Okay, so basically the eval moves from being roughly equalized to being way better for basically way better for white. And then you look at the commonness of how this move is played. So this is played at 20, and the top move, knight f6, is played 20,000. So it's very uncommon relative to the other top moves. So I think in terms of looking at your opening repertoire and doing analysis of your games, this b6 move fails this early test. It could be useful as a novelty in your game, but in general, if a move is played very infrequently and leads to a negative shift in your eval, you probably don't want to be playing it. So yeah, b6 there, and basically white's now got a solid initiative. So knight c6, e3, bishop b7, d4, and basically here white's showing a good edge. Black hasn't made much of a challenge for the center here, and I think overall this is not going to be that this is just not going to be that challenging for white to play against. He's got full control of the center. And black, it has made this development on the flank, but that's not really where the action is going on in this game. So bishop e3, d5, knight takes, bishop c4, bishop b4, castles, knight e7, and yeah, this overall I think basically this this leads to a pretty big advantage for white. Where does this really where is the biggest change in eval? I guess it's probably around. It's I guess it's on this move. So after knight e7, white's looking pretty good. I think here with bishop takes c3, simplifying things. The engine line. Bishop takes c3, b takes c3, castles, and then knight takes e3 maybe. This ends up being a this ends up being a much closer game for black. With knight e7, I don't know if it's a full win of a piece, but it's definitely way more dangerous for white. Queen a4 begins to be thrown into the mix as a potential tactical opportunity, and I think it does end up winning a full piece here, right? Knight takes, bishop takes, queen a4. So this is not really a playable line for black. Black sort of just gets tangled in this opening. Hey Anch, thank you very much for joining the stream. Thank you very much for being here. We should be getting to your game pretty soon. It's the next one on the list. But yeah, thank you very much for joining, Anch. I appreciate it. But yeah, so bishop takes c3 is the best way for black to proceed. After knight e7, this fork becomes available. There is pressure getting exerted on this d5 knight, but I think the way to relieve it is with bishop takes c3, and then either bishop. I don't know if bishop takes c3 is possible. Bishop takes c3 first move is possible. I don't know if knight takes, bishop takes is possible. But something does need to be done with this knight. But I think the best idea is probably knight to e7. Although the exchanges are also fine. The issue is this fork with the queen on a4. Anyways, going forward on this game, white ends up in a pretty good position. White's got a 4-point edge, and basically a piece. He wins a piece from this. In the actual game. This is how this goes. Same as the sideline. And now white's up a piece and should be able to kind of clearly win this. In a situation in which you're up a piece like this, you want to continue to trade off pieces. You want to use your extra piece in order to attack your opponent. And overall, I think it's a pretty good. I think you can make good progress using this. Using this general strategy to simplify situations. I wouldn't say stop attacking, but you can be a little bit more conservative. This was sort of a good demonstration, I think, of difficulties that can happen if white doesn't pay enough attention to kind of a desperate attack from black. This gets pretty wild. White is basically a piece up. This position should be getting closed out, and with g5 h5 here, black successfully makes counterplay. I think ideas in order to improve this, I think h4 is a good idea, maybe h4 here. This does potentially open up the king side, but an early and proactive response to this aggressive attack should be able to stop it. I sort of look towards like tactical training. I think tactical training here would be an improvement. With tactical training, I think you will be able to successfully execute this type of situation better. I mean, you've played the game well enough to be up a piece here, so I think you can close things out and win. Bishop c3 is an idea, you have an extra piece. You just need to be careful in response to this attack. I think things like rook a1 are slow and somewhat inefficient. Rook a1, pawn takes, queen takes, and basically you're moving this forward. Oh, no problem at all, FIFA Boy. Thank you very much. We have your lesson, FIFA Boy, for French defense theory tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern. Anyways, moving this forward. This queen a5 was a good tactic. Getting these pawns basically, off the board so that the h file was open was a good tactic for black. If white plays a move like h4 here and heads all this off, the issue that caused white to lose back that piece never happens. Really just proactive response. Basically, white is doing a lot of things on the queen side here. When he needs to pay, he doesn't need to make every move about defending on the king side, but he can advance his position by playing h4 and locking up the side in which he's vulnerable. I think was an I think pawn takes g5 made. I think this was an error here. Queen takes g5. I think if you leave things as closed as possible, you offer black fewer opportunities to attack. So knight h2 looks good. I don't know if knight h4 also works, but knight h2 looks good. Basically, with knight h2, it's going to take a really long time for black to generate any opportunities using an open rook file. So yeah, I think overall, this is pretty, pretty straightforward what happened. White had a great win of a piece in the opening, and I think there was a good tactic there, and then was a little bit not not attentive enough to an emerging attack from black, and that unfortunately ended up causing the decision in this game. That was tricky and a good idea by black to continue to attack here. I mean, many people, when they're down a piece, don't attack as aggressively as they should. But this type of kingside attack really worked out well and paid out well for black. This was a great idea. So yeah, overall, I think it was really, an interesting game. It had, more volatility than sometimes, but it was a little bit different than kind of the quick volatility that you sometimes see. It was a longer-term, more positional attack by black, very successful opening of the king side. And yeah, as Jack Mack says, tactics would be tactical study to make sure that both the attack is efficient as possible and the defense is efficient as possible. Really pay out well for both sides in this situation when it's so volatile. So my tactical study I talk about all the time is just do an hour of tactics a day, either on Chess Tempo or chess.com Puzzle Battle, chess.com Puzzle Rush. Whatever is your most preferred chess tactics trainer, but I really do think that provides the best returns for players under 2000. You can go back, you can always circle back and learn basically openings and preparation related things, but what will give you the best return on your time spent is just a ton of tactics training. If you do tactics for an hour a day, 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day, however much time you can allocate to it, if you're under 2000, you will quickly improve. That is pretty consistently true. If you do that for a few months, I think you'll be in a much better place than at the start of those few months. That's the efficient way to get better, and I strongly recommend it. I think it will really help almost everyone under 2000 or so. So I wanted to take a look at Anch and Spotkins's game. He's next. But thank you very much for I haven't read Chess Fundamentals by Capablanca, to be honest. I think those books are great. A lot of those common domain books are really underrated. I bet that's a great book. Capablanca was one of the greatest players of all time, and I think basically, learning positional fundamentals from his strategy was very helpful. It's another book that I probably should read. I don't know what its target audience is exactly, but I think that's probably a good book, having not read it. But I the main thing I think is just tactics. If you really want to show good returns on your time spent up to expert level, tons of tactical training, and make that kind of I would say the most heavily weighted part of your training regimen. It will really help you. Good question, Electric. It might be Capablanca in terms of natural ability. I believe that too. I mean, at the end of the day, all material is good, but I would really push for computerized tactics training. I think that's the most efficient way to improve. The other stuff I think is really helpful, and I think it's really helpful to take in all types of material. But if you really want to just raise your rating from 1400 to 1600 the quickest way that you can, I would say that the best move is to just do a lot of tactics training, either through chess.com or Chess Tempo or Lead Chess or whatever works. That's I think your quickest way to jump a rating class. I mean, if you haven't done it previously, your marginal returns will go down over time, but I think that's a pretty quick way to gain points and strengthen yourself. Hey, thank you very much. Thank you for the follow, Finn. Appreciate you joining the stream, and yeah, thank you for being here. Um, yeah, no, no. So that's my recommendation in terms of things to study. Is really just tactically focused. The other books are all great. I'm sure they will all help you. But tactics study on the computer is where I would suggest you spend the most time up until about expert level. It's not something you can teach. It's just something that you have to do. But if you do it, I think it'll really help you improve. Okay. This is Ansh's game against Spotkins. And also, you guys asked me who I think the best chess player of all time is. It might be Capablanca, to be honest. I think he probably had the best understanding relative to his time of any chess player. Magnus Carlsen is playing chess at the highest level that it's ever been played. That I'm confident about. I mean, you know, the games now are played at a higher level than they ever have been before with the help of computers and databases. But so it's a tough question. I think Capablanca was probably the best of. I mean, Fischer maybe. I don't know. I with Fischer I feel like he's problematic enough that I might have some implicit bias against him, but it's clearly a debated subject. But I'm actually a big. I think the most fun grandmaster of all time was Marshall, or the most fun world champion of all time was Marshall, or maybe Tal. But I think that I'm the most impressed by Capablanca's play relative to the players of his time. That said, the best chess games of all time, as from a world champion, are coming from Magnus Carlsen, and I think he's going to be world champion for a while. I didn't know that. I thought he was, but you're probably right. I think of him as a world champion, but maybe he wasn't. Anyways, Tal was. But yeah, the highly tactical guys are by far the most fun. The best I pretty sure was Capablanca. Although Carlsen's playing the best games of anybody ever. Carlsen's going to be, in my opinion, Carlsen's going to be world champion for a very long time. He's probably going to be champion for at least 5 more years, if not more. But that's just my prediction. We'll see if I'm right. Yeah, so here is a game of Ansh versus Spotkins. These are interesting openings. Basically, I think that this is a straightforward, solid opening. Good idea. Bishop f5, solid. I think basically, I like this kind of fundamentally good opening play. This makes sense to me. Bishop d6 is probably a little bit of an aggressive challenge here. And I think maybe bishop f5 was a divergence. I think c takes d5 diverged. This is interesting. But yeah, I like Slav game, Queen's Gambit accepted, and I think this overall ends up being a good this ends up overall being a pretty good structure for white. C takes d5 in the C takes d5 in the Slav is an interesting move. I guess I would say I'm predisposed against c takes d5. I think c takes d5 opens enough lines for black that it's not particularly good for white. With something like knight c6 here, black will basically continue to develop in a healthy way, and then especially with the bishop already out, black can hold this with e6. White might shoot for counterplay with knight b5 and threats on c7, but I think that basically here that and e6 here is a little bit of an issue because this leaves this c7 or puts more pressure on c7. It doesn't have the response from black that it needs. So yeah, let's take a look. Let's just go back to this. This is not an accurate statement. It was saying that there were no positions in the opening book with knight c3. I'm pretty sure this is a familiar one. But here, I would be slow to play c takes d5. I think white's best strategy from a big picture is try to get knight f3, bishop f4, e3, Really solid standard developing moves. One of the issues for black in the Queen's Gambit and in the Slav defense is poor development of the queenside pieces. Normally, this ends up being the bishop on c8. It can also be the knight that develops to an awkward square. If you can basically, one of the issues with playing knight c6 in the Queen's Gambit and in the Slav opening is that you block in the c7 pawn. If you play an early c takes d5 here, so say bishop f5 and then c takes d5, c takes d5, now this knight can comfortably develop to its most natural developing square, which is c6. I think, one of the main things that's good for white in Queen's Gambit declined is that you can basically cause issues with the development on black's queen side. So I think like knight f3, bishop f4, e3, and you basically end up holding back the queen side with the tension in the center. Things like knight f3, bishop f4, e3, but I would be slow to play c takes d5. In terms of analysis, c takes d5 is not bad, but probably not as good as queen b3 is what the engine is recommending. That's fine. Knight f3, I guess potentially could run into some issues with pawn takes c4. But I would aim towards straightforward developing here. The main line queen b3 is also evaled better as c takes d5. But in general, I'm sort of reluctant to play structures where c takes d5. I think that usually favors white, although it ends up being helpful to, although white will end up with some positions where he gets tactics with knight b5 and rook c1. Anyways, I again, might be biased because it's not what I play, but c takes d5 in the Queen's Gambit decline often can move black's position sort of forward. I would go with straightforward developing moves and maintaining the tension. Here the position's about equality. It's a game, there's not much of a, there's not much difficulty here. Rook c1. I think basically both sides have some good chances here. Rook a c8 looks complicated. I think you can play knight takes a6 on it though. What's wrong with knight takes a6 here? Rook c1, knight takes c1, rook c8. But yeah, basically this ends up with white having won a pawn at the cost of this advanced, very strong rook on this open file. It's an interesting positional game, but yeah, I overall I have no problems with this general trade. Engine's evaluating these rooks as being powerful enough to offset the win of the pawn. Maybe, but in practice, it's hard to get that play from those rooks well enough to really cause a lot of trouble. So rook takes c1, knight takes c1, bishop b6, bishop d3, knight takes. Now white's in a pretty solid position. Ideas include king d2, or maybe knight c4, then king d, or knight c5, then king d2. You need to be careful because this pawn in particular is very open to attack. The queen side in general is open to attack, but you're up a pawn as white, so you should be fine. But here, the move, the continuation is rook to c8. Give the rook this very powerful c file, and that should be enough to compensate white for the pawn. I mean, basically, this is going to turn into some really aggressive attacking. So c2, b4, and then white's going to have some positional issues with the strength of this bishop on the this defended rook on the 7th rank. So yeah, what else can be done here? C takes d5 is fine, but not the way that I played this opening. Knight c7 I think should be fine. I think that it does shift the eval hard towards black, like almost a pawn. But overall, I think the odds that black can successfully execute this attack are low. Are relatively low. I mean, rook c8 is problematic. This defended rook on c2 can cause some issues. But I think that you can challenge it, well enough to put you in at least a complicated position. Anything other than rook c8 here leads to a big advantage for white. So this is really the key part of the game. Rook c8 should put black in a good position. Anything else leads to white being up a pawn. With an extra tempo here, white can play b4 and knight c5. Was the bishop trade okay? Yeah, I think so. I think basically, I guess I would say, the bishop on f3. Or d3. Yeah. I guess I would say here. Yeah, this looks fine. Yeah, no worries. No. It's thanks for asking. And always feel free to ask questions. Like it's super helpful for me in terms of analyzing things. It's super helpful for me in terms of analyzing things to get questions. So yeah, no, is the bishop move bishop to d3 okay? Yeah, I think it's fine. You're up a pawn here, so in general you're going to want to trade off material. You're trading a bishop for a bishop, so you're not trading a bishop for a knight and giving your opponent better pieces in the endgame. I think bishop d3, is a way to move kind of the simplification of this game forward. If you play bishop d3, you trade that bishop on f5 for this bishop on d3, and yeah, you end up in a pretty solid position, I think. Ideas here for white. Yeah, that's no. I think it's a good idea. I think that's as good as any. I think that trading that bishop on d3 for that bishop on f5 makes a lot of sense to me, and yeah, looks fine. I wonder if knight to e4 might have been the best response for black here, but with f3 you can just play bishop takes f5 on the next move. I think the general simplification is a good idea for sure. So yeah, I'd keep up the idea. These knights, I think you have to play pretty precisely against, but the simplification of the bishop was not the issue. I might play b4 here. B4 looks kind of dangerous at first glance, but like b4 looks like it holds this pawn well. It's difficult for these pawns to become vulnerable. I'm thinking like a structure along like b4, knight b6, a5, and then knight c5, and I think white will be in a pretty good place here. That looks good to me, and I think with that in mind, yeah, in that context, moving these pawns or trading off this bishop so that you can move the pawns forward in that way ends up being a good play for white. Yeah, and I think all the pawns are held in that move order. So b4 here, I think, is an improvement. Engine is in this position, b4. None of these pawns are vulnerable. You can play like knight c5, and basically you're in good shape as white. King e2 can be played as well. You have to watch for knight c3 threats, but I think basically this is a good way to play it. And then block, basically ensure that all the pawns, basically that all the open lines for the rook remain blocked. If the rook can get onto the white's territory, that's probably going to be a problem for white. But knight c5, b5, I think basically white's okay. That's what I would recommend. That's how I would recommend going forward in this endgame. But yeah, it's complicated. I mean, these minor piece endgames are complicated, especially one where you're up material but your opponent's threatening positionally. Those are particularly dangerous because if you lose back the pawn that you're ahead, you're going to have a worse position. So here I would say b4 does more to tactically block everything, basically block everything off and make sure that none of the pawns are vulnerable and that the rook can't get in. On the next several moves, I don't know what the best way to get your rook involved is. It might be castling, but castling and then advancement of the knight to like c5 and b5, and I think basically white's in good shape here. So yeah, I think overall, it makes a lot of sense. Bishop d3 definitely goes with the idea of simplifying. I think simplifying here is a good plan. You trade a bishop for a bishop, so it's not like you're losing on the minor piece trade here. But overall, this is just this is a good position for white, but one that's very dangerous. So the idea, I think, to advance your game here is b4 and then dn c5. I think that's going to offer you the best chances of white of holding on to all the pawns and preventing the rook from coming in. But the trade was fine. I think the issue is just this is very tricky. It's just they're tough positions with the knights involved like this. B4 I like, and I think you're in good shape. Maybe castles. I don't know. But yeah, this overall is good, and good job continuing to, you basically you've got a solid position. It's really tactical maneuvering. Yeah. But here I think you're in a good place. B4, bn c5, white's in good shape. And then, but then these very aggressive knights, pretty much on tactics other than that, get to be very powerful here. Rook b1 maybe here. Yeah, rook b1 was, I think, correct. But this is, yeah, this is tough. Now you're playing it's probably a draw, to be honest, but sort of a tough one. Yep, looks good. Yeah, I think white can draw this. But I think drawing is the best chance for white. This is actually okay. So this got more complicated than I thought it would, and also, yeah, this got very complicated. So it ends up being a good win for white. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think it ends up being a draw around here. I think, unfortunately for white, at the point when the pawns fall. So here, I guess, in terms of my eval, I'd say that white's in a pretty good situation with b4 here. F3, unfortunately, I think just weakens this e3 pawn too much. But with b4 here, I think you can lock up the center, and lock up the queen side, and prevent the rook from coming in, and maybe be able to trade off one of the knights. I think this is really the key position. B4 here. I'm surprised that there's any play here. I would think that knight to d... So knight dc5, knight takes e3. Oh no, sorry, the knight hangs. I think this is the key position. It's a complicated position. It can basically... I thought f3 was the most problematic move here, but I guess this knight trade allowing this fork was... I don't know. It's tough. It's a tough situation. You're basically trying to hold on to a pawn that you have, basically like a pawn you're up, versus a versus a better position, better piece play for black. Castling might not have been the most efficient here. Probably king e2. But overall, I think white is good. Now it's a draw. Now it's a draw, slightly favoring black. Tricky. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, the tactic that I prefer here is not the f3 one. I think that knight or b4 followed by knight bc5 or knight dc5 is the best path forward. This just successfully accomplishes your goals of basically not hanging any of the pawns, and then also not dropping so not dropping any of the pawns, and not causing any issues with the queen side. Not letting the rook get in. I mean, basically, the rook getting in is very important for the value of this rook in terms of this endgame. But Yeah, no. I mean, from this point, I think it's definitely, once the knights come off the board, I think this is a difficult one. I think white should probably draw this, but it's difficult. I mean, this is obviously something that favors black. Black's winning chances are way better. But here, I think, basically, white's, white's best opportunity here is to draw. But overall, complicated game. In terms of improving it, I'm not a huge fan of c takes d5 in Queen's Gambit declined. That's a very broad statement, but true. I'm sure there are lines where c takes d5 is okay. Engine is suggesting Queen b3, Bishop f4. I just think c takes d5 solves problems for black that I think are better left without solving them for black. Queen b3 and then bishop f4 and then e3 is probably how I would go. Bishop takes, bishop trade is interesting. And here basically I think I think white's just better. He's up a pawn. Tactically complicated, but I think you have good chances. And but I think this kind of after this a4 b4 structure falls, I think white's equal or worse. So b4 either here or on the next move is better than knight takes knight to e5. Strongly prefer b4 here and then followed by knight d knight c5. But up to you. This is a it's a complicated position and really whatever works. But dnc5 and a4 b4 structure holds onto these pawns for quite a while. It will allow you enough moves for your rook to get involved in the position, which I think is important. I mean, it's a really good game. I thought you guys played great, and I think it traded off into a relatively equal endgame. I think here, black is, it's probably a draw. I mean, it's a tough position because I know black is slightly better here, but if black pushes too hard, he risks losing, as what happened. But overall here, I think white's white's likely to win. Or sorry, black's likely to win until the rook gets hung and all this. But overall, very interesting game. Thank you very much for sending it, Ancient Spotkins. And yeah, we'll I hope that's helpful, and we'll take a look at the next one. Solid play. In terms of improvements, I would say that knight dc5 poses the biggest improvement for white. It keeps the pawns defended and the rook from coming in. So yeah, nice game. Thank you very much for sending that over, Anch. I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, on to Willem's game. Cool. Okay. Awesome. And here, yeah, we've got basically an early Vienna game. Vienna with bishop c4. Yeah, I guess I don't know the name of this. Berlin-Vienna hybrid. Okay, sure. Knight f6, d3, h6, and basically white's fine here. This is the Vienna game can be a bit unchallenging for white against black. One of the issues of the Vienna game is basically you're not threatening the e5 pawn at any point, so you're not developing with the threat. But basically, here you have a basically white has slight initiative. Things are a little bit stronger, and you can start advancing on the king side. Is one of the key themes here. I would probably leave this uncastled and play bishop e3. Bishop e3, h3. I'd probably play bishop e3 with the expectation that the black bishop won't take, and that the king will castle. H3 is also playable. H3 might be valuable because you can transpose it into a kingside attack with h3, g4, g5. But overall, I think white is white's going to be solid. So knight takes, bishop there, and basically white is sort of cementing his advantage. In terms of basically from a from an eval perspective, the real slip for black, I guess, comes with b5 here. Or wait, I'm kind of curious. c5 here, I guess. I'm trying to think of exactly why this is bad. Basically, all the moves here have been relatively intuitive. Both players are developing. Both players are capturing space. Either black on the queen side here, and white, and both players in the center. I don't know. Knight d5 maybe could be helpful. Rook a b1. But I'm sort of wondering how, there's a big eval shift here, and I'm wondering what the exploit that white is looking for. Might play f4 before knight f3. Sure. Interesting idea. I don't know the Vienna game theory so well. Vienna game theory, I don't know how the f4 knight f3 structure holds up in terms of kingside safety. With f4 knight f3, I think you're pretty likely to have to commit to castling on the queen side. You're in this game. I think the correct place to also, one other thing is you have to be very careful about the knight g4 square there. Yeah, no, interesting. Cool. Yeah, no. So it is an interesting opening. I don't know it extremely well, which is great because I get to kind of go through and practice it. But f4 does allow knight to g4 in some lines. d6 hasn't been played yet, so that's not an immediate issue. You could also play f4 h3, and then that knight is not a problem on g4. It might be a problem on h5, but not g4. I don't have any problems with this opening structure. I think this opening structure is fine. So in that case, it would be knight e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, f4. Yeah, that's the why I'm blanking on the name. Vienna Gambit, I guess. But Vienna Gambit, we've gone over a couple times on this stream, and basically the Vienna Gambit, we've figured out that this or Falkbeer Gambit, that's right. But we've gone over this this opening a bunch of times where Falkbeer Gambit d5 is or is it Falkbeer Gambit? I mixed the names up. But this structure, this Vienna Gambit, ends up being better for basically ends up being consistently better for black after d5, but better for white after every other situation. Every other move for black leads to a white advantage. So here I was thinking that basically this ends up being a good idea for white. And this, yeah, this is interesting. So yeah, knight c6, f4 is Falkbeer. Okay. Yeah, so we were talking about this, this f4 move, and then the differences between knight c6 and knight f6. Knight f4, e takes f4 is the correct response. Knight f6, f4. D5 is objectively very much the correct response. This one here, basically you have a good response for black out of d5 and a relatively bad response for black out of everything else. So that's why I would, that's an idea. I mean, you're basically playing for black to not play d5 here. We've gone through it a few times on here. But yeah, d3, h6, this is all sort of straightforward developing for white. Castles, knight takes, bishop takes. Okay, so, white here is basically equal. All of the moves make intuitive sense. They're both, they're all sort of developing moves. And here, the ideas are like, I mean, I'm a little bit confused about the eval shift on this one. So I want to figure out kind of what the component is that makes it shift towards towards white here. Maybe queen e1. The bishop's development is very restricted. I think maybe knight e1 is kind of interesting. I want to see how knight e1 works with knight e1 paired with c3 here. Or sorry, knight d1. Knight d1, c3, and then pressure on this bishop. That could be interesting. I guess, yeah, I would say knight d1. I know it's not... The engine has a few different options. Knight d1 is not one of the preferred... I guess now it is that I played it, but this... a knight d1, c3 seems like a structure that might be helpful for white here. So yeah, white's looking solid. And c3, yeah, wins the bishop. Black was sort of playing games with this bishop, early. I think, that one of the main things here is not letting this bishop get trapped on d4. I think, when you play c5, you have to keep the mobility of that bishop in mind. But white's way of dealing with this is fine, and it involves getting the knight off the board and then playing c3. C3 with d5 with c5 and e5 in place is pretty killer. So, yeah, I'd keep an eye on that. Yeah, white's got a better endgame here. He's up a pawn, and has a rook on the 7th. Way better king mobility. And yeah, this should be pretty good for white. There's a missed win here. Let's just go over that. King c6. Interesting. Don't necessarily see why this... I'd have to take a look at this rook and pawn endgame. Yeah, no, this is a difficult game to win for sure. I understand. So yeah, maybe king to c6. Getting the rook in front of the pawn, or getting the king in front of the pawn is definitely good. There's a lot of technical endgame play here that is complicated. Okay, cool. So it ends up being a win for white. A lot of maneuvering. In terms of improvement for white, let's think about this. I think that the opening was fine. Everything made sense here. c5 was an error. I think white's playing pretty accurately here. In terms of ways to advance this opening, maybe bishop e3. But yeah, like knight d1 here and c3 maybe. But you win the bishop anyway, so whatever worked in that opening was solid. And now with the bishop up, it should be pretty close to a win. I'm really searching for an improvement here. It's sort of tricky when you've played, a relatively sound in-book opening theory and your opponent hangs a piece. I mean, the game gets decided very early. I think I might play knight d1 here, but rook ab1 is fine. No issues, I think, here for white. I mean, basically, with d5, black has committed to a line in which he, has to lose the bishop. With d5, the line here is knight takes d5. So here, I guess, is the biggest improvement that I've seen for white in this situation. Yeah, f4. I think basically, f4 is an aggressive move. I mean, I don't know. I know like the Grand Prix attack and the f4 move in the Sicilian, but the f4 out of knight c3 and Vienna game, I have less understanding of that knowledge. Like queen h4 should be able to be met by g3, but it is tricky. Here, knight takes d5 is the improvement. So knight takes d5 puts pressure on this bishop on d5. Basically, it'll trade off similar to the game traded off, but it won't be. But pawn takes is not as forced. Here, pawn takes, bishop takes, offers black an out. With knight takes here, basically the best move is c4, and with c4 you get a big positional edge. C4, knight takes, either probably queen takes, pawn takes, bishop takes c4, and white is better. So that was an improvement. The issue with this tactic is yeah, and then you play f4 and transpose into that Falkbeer gambit that you're talking about. Yep, makes sense. And I assume often they don't actually play d5, and then you just have a solidly better position with knight f3. It's just a little bit worse. But yeah, with knight takes d5, this is really the only change I can make for white in this game. Otherwise, I think it was played solidly, and then you're a piece up, and then you just kind of close it out. So I don't know if there's that much to add. Knight takes d5 exerts pressure on black in a much more effective way. This knight is threatening that knight, and basically you're threatening c3 as well. This ends up being a good way to play as white. Dangerous for dangerous for black, and basically forces some variation of c4 to get this bishop out of there on d5. So that poor bishop's mobility ended up hurting black, and with knight d5, the situation is pretty good. So knight d5 and c3 pressure coming. c4 is the best move for black, and this trade is very favorable for white. White's up 2 pawns, and and his bishops are slightly better. I think you would say his bishops are better. Bishop d3 can be played. Looks good. Yeah, cool. So in terms of advancing this, what can you really do here? No real errors. C5 was an error that black ended up paying for with the full bishop. That was a mistake. And then knight takes d5 is just slightly better tactical execution here. Pawn takes d5 allows the bishop takes c3 out. Knight takes d5 allows c3. So knight takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes, c3, and white is in good shape winning the piece. Going on in this game, I think now you're up. This is the sideline. Going on in this game, white's up a full piece, and overall, white's looking sharp. This is it's up about 4 pawns. Should be a win. This was an error. Black's coming up with his end of game attack basically. If you can get through this attack as white, you're gonna win. And then g3 does not effectively defend. So rook e2, actually g3 is fine. e3 causes some problems with rook to e2, I think. White basically has to be careful, so I'm going to slow it down to get the tactic right. Interesting. Yeah. I think basically white here ends up in a better. Basically white should have a better position. He's up a full piece. So, in terms of slowing this down, I guess I would say, now you should be in relatively good shape as white. Definitely go with the main principles, trade off pieces, if you can. And, this pass pawn on e4 is a problem. You will have to deal with this in a tactically careful way, and things can go wrong quickly for you. But I feel like queen e1 could be good. Bishop c3 could be good. White should be able to hold this. Queen takes e3 is I have to think a pretty serious error here. Let's slow this down. Let's actually get this right. What's the solution? It's this move which is the most important, and here bishop c3 could probably work. Queen b6 maybe. But overall, white should win this. Yeah. All right. I mean, yeah. So let's go back to the key position. I think the rook endgame isn't particularly instructive, but hey, thank you very much for the follow, Chick. Thank you very much for joining the stream. But yeah, so d5 here, pawn takes, knight takes, knight takes. Now white is up, wins the pawn. E6, e5 is a problem. Maybe this could have been headed off. Maybe if you just play rook e1, like maybe the error here was letting this e pawn even get started. Like maybe here instead, like instead of c4, just rook e1 and queen e2, and then white is fine. I guess I would recommend that. I'd also look at something along the lines of like queen e3, threats on the h6 pawn. But here, yeah, c4 is probably not the correct way to advance. What you want to do is not trade off pawns here. You want to trade off pieces. So that's either the queen trading off the queen and the rook, or that's trading off, it's trading off one of the heavy pieces. You don't have to let white or black get a passed pawn here, and c4 sort of moves you in the position where you're giving black a passed pawn. Engine is suggesting b4. Engine is also suggesting c4, but I just fundamentally don't really particularly like this. Also, yeah, I guess you never really have any big tactics as white. But the c4 recommendation I'm not a huge fan of. I think from a fundamental perspective, keeping the passed pawns off the board is probably a better play for white. So I'd just play conservative things like queen e2 or queen e3. On queen e3, black probably has to play like, yeah, queen b7. I mean, you'd have to go through and calculate it, but I just think you can kind of slowly advance this. You don't need to play a move that gives your opponent a connected passed pawn here. You can just sort of relax, play like queen e3, play like rook e2. I see that the engine is saying c4, but I'm not a fan of that for fundamental reasons. It just makes things more complicated than they need to be. Things like queen e2, things like f rook e1, or sorry, the rook on f2 to f1. But I don't think you'd have to push so hard on this. You're up a piece, should be able to win up a piece, and I'm questioning the engine output here. Yes, when you're up pieces, you should, when you're up pieces, you should keep pawns on the board. That's right. When you're up pawns, you should keep pawns on the board. Basically, if you're up material, you trade off the pieces but keep the pawns on the board. That's the overarching logic. There's always specific reason, or there's always specific cases that differ. But when you're up pieces, keep pawns on the board. When you're up material, pawns or pieces, keep pawns on the board. And when and trade off the pieces. I hope I said that clearly. If you're up, trade off pieces but not pawns. If you're down, trade off pawns but not pieces. That's the fundamental there. So yeah, thank you very much for taking a look at that. Thank you for sending in that game. I really appreciate it, Willem. And I think the opportunities for improvement are a slower response here, and also knight takes d5 as opposed to pawn takes d5, so that the bishop takes c3 tactic isn't allowed. Bishop takes c3 tactic creates an opportunity for black to get out of trouble, and I wouldn't allow that to happen. So yeah, thank you very much for sending it, Willem. Appreciate it. But yeah, good work. Good work. Thank you for sending the game, Willem. And yeah, very interesting stuff. Thanks for the game. On to the next one. Next game is Till Daniel Noah's game. So let's take it from his perspective. And cool. So it's basically King's Indian defense, d5, knight c6. And here I would play c6. Knight c6, I've seen this kind of a fair number of times in this stream. I think it's a thing that a lot of people, yeah, no, this is really interesting. But I would say it is really tempting to develop your knight here to c6. But in the queen's pawn games, you always need to work hard to play things like c6 and prevent the knight, and basically prevent the c7 pawn from getting locked in. This is a common trend in a lot of queen's pawn games. With c6 here, you end up, if there's a trade on d5, which white sometimes does, you develop the knight to c6. But Hey, welcome, Tarash fan. Thank you very much for joining the stream. Yeah, good. Happy to be here, to be honest. But yeah, c6 I think is the idea. c6, knight d7, and black is strong. So yeah, c6 over knight c6. Knight c6 locks in the c7 pawn, and that creates some problems for black. So c6 here. In terms of looking at this using the framework that I had come up with before, this okay, it's interesting. But yeah, take a look at the two things here. First, the eval. So on knight c6, the eval shifts, half a pawn towards white. That should be a flag that knight c6 is not the best idea. Cool. Yeah, no problem, Tarash. No, thank you very much for sending the game, and yeah, very interesting game out of that early e6, I think. So yeah, so c6 is good. Knight c6 is so knight c6 would basically fail that test. This knight c6 move is not book move. I mean, I think in this position you look at the opening book and you determine pretty easily that c6 and castles are the moves for black. And then there's also this eval change. So the eval shifts about 0.5 pawns towards white after knight c6. So using those two criteria, which I think I'm going to use from now on as the criteria to determine whether an opening is good or an opening move is playable or not playable. I think what you, on those metrics, the shift in eval and the commonness based on the opening book, I think you would screen out knight c6. We went over this lesson yesterday on how to improve your openings and how to learn openings. And the framework that I came up with was basically use the eval and use the opening book. And if there's an eval shift against you and there's an opening and you're stepping out of the common moves in the opening book, that's probably a good indication that you shouldn't be playing that particular opening line. I'm sure there are exceptions, especially ones where the eval gets tricked. But c6 is better than knight takes than knight c6 here for that reason. But that's the recommendation that I'm making for learning openings and how to screen out good and bad opening moves. Yeah, I mean, you got to really trust your coach, but you have to really trust your coach. If your coach creates novelties for you, hopefully that gives you a good indication that it's an okay thing. But at this point, I would give credibility to the engine in terms of objective playability to virtually any human. Just so you guys understand where I'm at in terms of humans versus engine evals. The engine is always going to tell the truth. That's the that's the main thing. The engine doesn't want you to have flashy wins. It just wants you to tell you what the best move is. So that's why I really trust the engine and engine eval. If your coach pre-makes you novelties and you have an idea of what to do in terms of and your coach gives you a pre-made lines that are working well for you, then sure, maybe that's an exception. But in terms of determining objective playability, nothing supersedes the engine. That's my opinion on that. But I have a pretty modern opinion on that. Others may disagree. But yeah, that's the method by which you would screen out opening moves. Are the moves in the common opening book, and are they okay objectively as determined by the engine? That's my recommendation. So c6 would screen that out versus knight c6. Other ideas here. Here basically positions relatively equal. Both sides are developing somewhat normally. Queen d6 probably creates some tactical issues with knight to b5. I think knight to b5 will force this queen off of that move pretty quickly. Yeah, develop your pieces makes sense. No, it does, and that is a counterintuitive thing, an anti-fundamental thing about queen's pawn openings. Basically, the thing about the thing about queen's pawn openings is that developing the knight to c6 and blocking the c pawns in, or the knight to c3 blocking the c pawns in, is not a good development. That's counter to fundamentals, which is just develop as quickly as possible. So at the end of the day, I think in terms of training, Yeah. Uh, yeah, no. I think that's right. And I think just having like a full, complete analysis is really helpful here. Look at the engine. Look at the engine output and the framework that I'm giving, which is it a commonly played move, and is it an okay move objectively as played by the engine? Using those two metrics, I think you should be able to screen out things that are good and bad in your repertoire. That's my recommendation on that topic. Um, there are exceptional cases, but I think that's a good free framework that you can do to evaluate moves in your repertoire. Anyways, Queen D6 would run into Knight to B5, and I think here, yeah, Knight to E5 is a tactical blunder. Knight takes, knight pawn takes, queen takes, and black is way better in the center and has won a pawn. So black's in very good shape at this point. Yeah, it looks like smooth sailing for black. A lot of material up and a pretty smooth win. So overall, yeah, I think this is a good game, a good win for black. My suggestions here are like basically knight to e5 was a bad error. There weren't that many errors for black. I think black basically played a pretty accurate game. I mean, there are a few kind of missteps, but I think first this one knight c6 that we went over, and in terms of and just this opening prep strategy that I'm recommending, looking at the engine lines and the book lines, and screening out moves would have, I think, made you have a different response here. So I think that one's pretty covered as an opening move. And then here, this queen d6. I understand wanting to develop the queen somewhere. Complete your development, including the queen. So like queen d7. But it just met too quickly with this relatively advancing move for white. Knight to b5 doesn't really cause white any issues. I mean, it doesn't have to move back till it's prompted by a6. But it does cause black issues and probably forces queen d7 here. That's why I would say, the immediate queen d7 doesn't have that problem, and for that reason, it's an improvement. That's the two, kind of improvements in this game that I see for black. Overall, I think it's, a well-played game, makes sense, smart, and basically you win a piece and get, you basically get a piece up here. Solid. Yeah, and basically after that knight e5 move, liquidating the center, black's just in really good shape. So only two suggestions on this. Use that metric that I've described, basically combining the opening book and combining the eval to take a look at moves like knight c6. Is it normal to have two Fion Shadow bishops here? That's a big question. Yeah, I would say it's not bad. I don't think you run into any problems with it. This makes sense as a general strategy. The queen side's going to end up liquidating here. In many ways, getting this I would look at it more not as is it normal to have two bishops or is it incorrect to have two bishops. What I would say here is white. I would take this position in isolation and just say, is white? Is this a valuable place for your bishop? And you can look at this position and basically look at the weakness of the white squares for white here, and say, yeah, that probably is a good diagonal. This structure, this bishop is hitting this d4 pawn, but this bishop, if placed on b7, doesn't really hit any resistance on the white squares. So I think long term, yeah, that's actually a pretty good place to put your bishop. It will really effectively control the center here. So yeah, I like the idea. Makes sense. And then just the second, and I think there's really only two in this game. Just the second misstep is queen d6, where it can be relatively easily dealt with by knight to b5. Queen d7 here, and I think black doesn't run into nearly the same kind of problems. Overall, this makes sense as an intuitive move, and pawn takes, knight takes. and I think basically black is solid. Um, yeah, and then but instead on this black plays this knight e5 move, and that basically shifts the game by about 5 points and wins for black. But only two real suggestions. Just I would say, use the framework for learning openings. I recommend it was in the last lesson. I play a few different openings, Willem. I play, I try to switch it up in games where I play, a lot. Like if I play bullet games, I'll probably play a more diverse set of openings than over the board. Over the board, I do kind of lean towards the same set of openings. I think they're objectively the best. And also now, when I'm sort of trying to learn new openings, I'm playing a more diverse set of openings than I generally am. I guess I would say my tournament opening preparation is relatively consistent. I'm both trying to broaden it right now, and big picture, I think you can go with a fixed opening preparation. For tournaments. I'm just in a particularly weird case right now because I'm trying to learn stuff, and I'm trying to try out things that I haven't tried out before from an opening perspective. If they hadn't blundered the knight, do I see a good spot for starting an attack? Sure. Let's take a look. This probably is a situation where you can liquidate the center. I would complete development here, so I'd castle. But like in this situation, pawn takes c4, knight a5 looks good. And I normally don't like, queen pawn taking c4 here. I mean, I know it's mainline in many situations, but like I figure that generally liquidates a relatively good pawn in the center. I'd play pawn takes, bishop takes a5, knight a5. The engine immediately disagrees, but okay. I like this idea because basically it will give you this bishop threat in the center. This move order really increases the set of the options available to you. The engine's improving on my idea with e5 and then pawn takes e5 and then knight takes e5. This actually is correct. Engine assisted. This is a better idea. But the same general concept applies, which is you have this bishop on this fianchetto. The bishop's going to become super powerful on this diagonal. So because it increases your bishop's mobility by so much, moves like knight a5 I think are pretty good. The engine finds e5, knight takes e5. That's better. Better idea than mine. This bishop on this long diagonal is good. So e5, pawn takes e5, knight takes e5. And good strength from the light-scored bishop on the fianchetto. That's the attack that I would play. Pawn takes c4, and then bishop takes c4, and then I instinctively would play knight a5, but I don't know, knight d8 might be better. Overall, black's just in good shape. That bishop has great mobility there. So the idea, my idea for next advancement in this game is pawn takes c4, let this bishop loose on the long diagonal. That would be my my improvement to the strategy of this game. The knight got hung, so that was helpful. And you win the game after the knight trades off and liquidates the center. But yeah, thank you very much for sending the game, Jack. Feel free to send in as many as you want. We have some open slots in the relatively near future now. And feel free to keep sending games in. That was super interesting, super helpful for you to ask questions so I can guide the analysis a little better. And thanks very much for sending that in and participating in the stream. Cool, we have two more here. We have Mr. Gimmick's game. Here we go. Of course. No, thank you for being here. Okay, cool. It loaded correctly, which is always a good sign. All right. So e4 going up against b6. This is so b6 is a playable move. I've seen masters play b6. I've seen games where IMs have played b6. It's fine. It's relatively unchallenging for white. Similar to a flank opening, similar to modern King's Indian defense. Hey, welcome, Chick. Thank you very much for joining the stream. Hello. But yeah, so B6 is an opening move that doesn't it basically doesn't advance the pawn structure in any way, it doesn't advance center control in any way. So you're basically playing a flank opening against a big center opening for white. In general, I have a predisposition against these kind of modern games, modern perk type stuff. Like, I think basically, the purpose of these modern games is to give your opponent a spatial advantage and a developmental advantage, both objective advantages, with the hope that he overextends and misplays them. In my mind, that's not really that's not the way that I like to play. I think it's very effective against lower rated opponents, but beating masters or beating high level players out of the perk modern is a bit tricky, since you're offering them kind of pre-made advantages. It's tough. It's tough to give your opponent advantages and hope to basically rely on their misplay. It works. It works at many levels. It will help you beat lower rated opponents, I think, but it is a strategy that seems dangerous to me from an intuitive perspective. Okay, so d4, b6, bishop b7. And now, basically black is, black's playing solid against, black's playing solid and for a pawn push, great, c5, against this big center, using a modern strategy. This is right. You're going to need a pawn push at some point, so c5 is a very reasonable way to do this. This makes sense. I think maybe d5 could be good. Pawn takes d4, now d5 here maybe. Engine is suggesting f5, another pawn break. I'm wondering about d5, which isn't on the list, so probably bad since it opens up the white squares. Knight c6, knight f6. But basically challenging moves. I guess f5 is good because it puts pressure on g2 through this long diagonal. Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it is a very wild move. That's the engine suggestion with this threat on g2. Makes sense, I guess, but yeah, that opens up the position like crazy. What do you do? Pawn takes, bishop takes, queen h5 here, like that. This looks pretty dangerous. G6, f takes, knight f6, g7. I mean, this is pretty nuts, actually. Knight takes, pawn takes, queen takes, bishop takes h1. That's pretty crazy. That's a lot to go through. A lot of tactical compensation there. Yeah, no. I mean, what can the engine knows what's correct, right? I mean, better than any human does at this point. So, what can you really do? So it plays that out, and it plays f5 with that whole line in mind, which is pretty insane. I would take a look. I would probably play something not too different than bishop d5 or knight c6. I would play a straightforward developing move, and I would maybe consider d5 as well. D5 is looking correct to me from some perspectives. I mean, basically, this transposes into a sort of French-like thing in which there's an open C file. I guess it sort of transposes into an unfavorable French line. That might be the issue. With d5, basically you're going into the French. And as I've said a few times on the stream, basically one of the real fundamental components of the French is the ability to maintain the d4, e5 pawns, which black will try to undermine with f6 and c5. Those undermining moves basically are trying to remove this, to remove this pawn structure. And if you play d5, you transpose into a French in which the c5 undermining resource isn't available. So that's really the value of this. So that's why d5 isn't really considered to be so good. So I think straightforward developing moves here. f5 is pretty crazy. That's a crazy attack and very interesting. The engine sees in way better than I can see in the seconds that I have to look at it. But bishop b4 is a reasonable move because it is a developing move. Um, but now you're still in a situation. Now you're sort of in that unfavorable French that I was talking about. Um, one of the really valuable things about learning the book that I use is the Ideas Behind the Chess Openings. I think that's a great book that you can read quickly, a very efficient way to learn the themes of the chess openings. This is Ideas Behind the Chess Openings by Fine. Solid, good ideas. And I think basically there, one of the things that they explain very well is the French. But I think one of the things that's good about learning the fundamentals of the openings as opposed to just random opening moves is you can evaluate a move like d5 a little bit differently. Interesting, Chiku. Thank you very much for telling me that. I'll pull up an invite for you right now, and it should work. This should. Sorry about that. Sorry for the difficulty with that. Let me pull that right now. Here you go. Sorry, thank you very much for telling me. If you see me make other errors like that, Chiku, please tell me. It's super helpful to have people tell me the things that I'm, if there's any errors like that, because, they help me fix them. So that's why I want to. Definitely. If I'm making any mistakes, let me know. So thank you, Chiku. There's the link to the Discord. I thought I put one up that was good forever, but I must have put one up that was only good for 7 days. So thank you very much for telling me that, Chiku, and I hope I haven't. I hope that mistake hasn't been there for too long. As soon as the stream is over, I'll go back and fix it. Thank you for helping with that. No, thank you. No, great. Thanks a lot for that. Bishop e4 makes sense. Straightforward developing moves make sense. But one of the main points about what's helpful in the French defense is basically d5. You can evaluate this this follow. And thank you very much for the follow, Abasa. Thank you very much for joining the stream. So here. D5 runs into runs into this French transposition. So knowing that book, basically having read that book and knowing the fundamental of the French openings, which is White's goal in winning French is to maintain this d4 e5 structure, I can say d5 probably isn't a good move for that specific reason. It transposes into a French opening in which White has the established d4 e5 pawns but can't play c5 in order to disrupt it. Yes, exactly right, Tarash. And the c5 pawn is actually very important in the c pawn is very important in the French because it's one of the main pawns that can be used to undermine the d4 pawn. So anyways, Ideas Behind the Chess Openings by Fine, great book, but super helpful actually in evaluating this position. Because that basically this is a French with a resource missing for black. Is f4 a good move in the advanced French? Yes. I mean it's always specific to the situation, but generally yes. And it can be used in the same context that I'm describing, which is the goal of the French is to maintain d4 e5, with f4. One of Black's other undermining resources in the French is f6 to take the e5 pawn, and f4 can be played to take, if f takes e4, or f takes e5, f takes e5, and that resource for Black to undermine this d4 e5 structure is also depleted. So the f4 can be Yeah. I mean, it does create some vulnerabilities for Black. So it's the c5 pawn is the initial resource to try to undermine the d4 e5 structure in the French. But yeah, the f4 can be used to basically hold the f6 and f takes e5 pawns. That's the goal of that structure gimmick. So thank you very much for. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for for anyone who has access to the Discord. feel free to add uh, like suggestions. There's a game submission section on my Discord where people can send games in for review. But I might just change the labeling of that to lesson suggestions or lesson/game suggestions. But please, if you guys have any ideas for things that you'd like me to cover, okay, yeah, I like it. Awesome. All right. I'll add that to May 14th at 10 a.m. Eastern, and we'll make basically unsound openings. Yeah, absolutely. Please send games in, Chiku. Please send games in. The tactical stuff I can't help as much with, because basically the engine does it way better than I do. So that's yeah, no, interesting, Tarash. This is really cool. I'm learning the landscape a lot better. But I've seen that assessment a bunch of times. So yeah, I like it. I like it, Tarash, and definitely added for added for May 14th at 10 a.m. Eastern. Yes, that is true. That is true. Yeah, but please send games, Chiku. I'm happy to look at your games. I would say I highly recommend looking at them with engine, because I think that the engine's going to do better work than I can calculating the tactics immediately. But yeah, please send your games in, Chiku, and I can lead you towards ways that I think might be helpful in terms of advancing your knowledge of your games. But yeah, thank you for asking, Chiku, and please post your games in the game submission section of the Discord. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a good excuse to learn English notation. The one thing I would say about that Johemian Knapsody is basically with that with that notation. Keep in mind that one of the good things and one of the things that I really like about chess, the ideas behind the chess openings as the book. I definitely think I'm trying to the extent that that's going on, Tarash. That's really not right. I agree completely with your statement. I'm not gonna. I don't want to make any big statements on that, but I think that the statement that you're making is a very correct one, Tarash, and I really appreciate you making that statement. So yeah, no, I really appreciate you making that statement, Tarash, and always in favor of people making statements like that. I just don't feel like getting it. I feel like there are other discussions that I am already sort of interested in addressing before that one, but you're absolutely right. So yeah, on that topic, Johemian Rhapsody, one of the things about ideas behind the chess openings is it's a book that you can read without really playing out that much. You can just basically read the chapter introductions. You can read it sort of like a book as opposed to like a chess book. You can just kind of read for the basic components. Yeah, no. I think that there are. It's kind of painful in some ways because the Stafford Gambit you just can't justify playing. It's 1.6 pawns advantage for white, and you're playing into that intentionally as black. What are you going to do with a deficit of 1.6 pawns on move 6? Like, just disastrous. But anyways, the thing about ideas behind the chess openings is that you can read it without even really going through much of the specific notation. It has great drawing, it has great pictures, and it has great chess explained in very clear language, so you can understand the London is one of the best openings. The computer indicates and the computer's objective. London's a very good system. That's why the world champions and the best computers play it. The main points of ideas behind the chess openings is it's a very readable book. You don't have to bring a chess book with you. You know, it often doesn't go into openings more than 10 moves, often not more than 5 moves as well. And you can just read it like a book, and it'll make sense. And it'll explain a lot of things about kind of openings and how they transpose into each other. Addresses some important pawn structures. There's another good pawn structure book that I think super helpful. That also reads like a book. I think that's a particularly good one, and I'm blanking on the name. It's like Pawn Structure Chess or something. But I'm gonna start recommending that one too, because it also reads in a very straightforward way, and I think is a helpful one in determining kind of middle game pawn structures. Anyways, going back onto this game. So transposing it into a French here is something that you don't want to do because of the understanding of the openings, where understanding of the French, where d4, e5 is a structure you want to maintain, c5 is a key resource for black in terms of making sure that pawn structure can't be maintained, and then that resource isn't there. So that's why you wouldn't want to transpose it into a French with d5 here. Otherwise, b6 is a flank opening. You're playing for overextension, and you want to develop in the most healthy way that you can. Maybe bishop e7, g6 here. This all makes sense. I think you've done a pretty good job developing with a spatial disadvantage. Bishop takes f5, I have to think plays out better for black. I think black loses in that trade. Yeah, I know it's pretty. I mean, I don't know the stream that I don't know the streams that well, to be honest, Tarash. But to the extent that that goes on, that's not right. I mean, it's not right to teach people things that you know to be false. I make many mistakes, and I try my best, and I'm not the best chess player, but I guarantee the things that, no, you're completely right, Tarash. I've seen enough of it to know that you're definitely pointing at something that is real. But yeah, my I will definitely make errors on this stream, but I promise that I will tell you the things that are correct to my best knowledge. Anyways, bishop takes f5, pawn takes f5, castles, bishop b2, g6, and yeah, I mean, I wish I was better, to be honest, Tarash. I wish I was an IM or GM making these statements. I would be a lot more credible, but to the best of my knowledge, everything I tell you is correct. That will always be true. But yeah, this is a good job developing. This is a good job developing straightforwardly with a limited, with limited spaces to attack. So g6 holding on to f5 is good. Knight to b8, knight to d7, and then knight to c4, I think is a good way to advance this. But I like the rook placed on the c file. I like the maneuvering with the knight. This all is, this all makes sense for black. These placements of the pieces are almost so good that you start wondering whether they can be sacrificed for a knight if you can get a connected pass pawn out of them. That's my thinking on this. It's going well. It's going well. Thank you very much for yeah, no, thank you very much, Chiku. I really appreciate it. And thank you very much. It's going well. It's going well. How are you doing, AB? How are you? But yeah, this I think is pretty solid. I think basically Black has successfully executed the idea of the modern strategy here. Basically White has overextended, Black has not developed in a super sound way, and White has not developed in a super sound way, and Black has maneuvered well with a spatial disadvantage. Rook on c8 is a valuable piece. The bishops are a little bit restricted, but I think should be salvageable. Like, I think you can play like maybe a5 and at least test White. I mean, basically, if there's strength on bishop a6, that could be good. But yeah, overall here, I think this uh, uh, I don't know. But yeah, pressure on the king seems good, and I overall black ends up winning this situation. Um, how to advance this? Pawn takes a3, bishop e7, b4. White has a spatial advantage. The tide really turns. I think bishop takes f5. The knight on f5 was probably not a good idea. And an h5 basically will place, more. Basically, this locking of the king side makes sense. From the perspective of forward plans for this game, I think this is strategically a very good idea. H5 holding the g4 square is good. Locking up the king side is good. Your attack on the queen side is much stronger than White's ability to defend it. So rook c8, c4, and advancements on the queen side here, I think, are where you want to direct the forward-looking parts of this game. Rook c4, a rook c8, or f rook c8, and I think yeah, and I think basically here h5. I'm from New York City, Chikyu. Thank you very much for asking. But yeah, this yeah, this idea I think is pretty much this idea I think is good for black. So yeah, I like this. I mean, you're looking for a strategy here to in general in chess, you're looking for strategies that advance your positions the most effectively. Ideas like rook c8 is a good move to move the rook to the most the most mobile file. Rook c7, rook c8. I think this is all good, and basically ways that black can advance this are all are all a good plan. Ideas like maybe locking up this king side so that all play is directed on the queen side makes a lot of sense. You have way better control of this file, and ideas like knight c7, knight b4, queen c7 are all things that will move you forward here. It'll become somewhat drawish, but anyways, sort of dangerous general play for white. Black's doing a great job opening the situation up when this when this is the correct flank side of the board to be playing on. And overall, yeah, this game makes a lot of sense. And pressure on b3. Cool. And great finishing tactic with h4. h4 is pretty killer. H4 basically just opens up the H file and the king gets checkmated. Yeah, this I think ends up being pretty good. For this is a well played opening for black, and yeah, the position really shifts right around here. Rook e2, I guess, is inefficient. The engine is pushing for queen to b5. I think control over this b5 square is really what the engine is oriented towards. But black doesn't really have a whole lot to improve on in this game. Overall, this just seems like a correctly played game. We can take a look. Let's take a look at the engine analysis. But I'm going to guess this is a 90+ accuracy game for black. I'm having trouble kind of focusing on specific moves that black played incorrectly. Yeah, so it's like about 90. Okay, interesting. And the missteps, where's this mistake? C5 seems like a good move. I guess replacing this tension. Trading this C pawn for that C pawn probably isn't right. I think I would play D5 here. So on c3, I'd probably play d5. Or wait, what's going on with this? That's actually really interesting. So wait, what happens? So inaccuracy. So the mistake here was d5. I wonder if that's has to do with wow, that's great. That's great, GQ. That's very interesting. I didn't know about that. There's a lot of stuff going on in chess right now that I think is really interesting. It's an interesting space to be in at the moment. I feel like a lot of things are changing. I think at the end of the day, it's going to come out to be d5 is mainly a mistake due to the crazy f5 line. Yeah, no, there's truth to that. But anyways, yeah, d5 as opposed to f5. I think basically, black is looking for ways to develop here. Engine is suggesting knight f6. Engine is suggesting f5. Knight f6 makes intuitive sense. But I do think you do need a pawn break. So d5 makes sense. It makes sense to me. I don't know if there's a tactical response that makes it officially an error, but yeah, this is tricky. But this is good maneuvering. This all works well. Complicated position. I don't know. I like d5 here too. What happens on the eval for d5? d5, e5, and then you have a real French. French with c5 still there. Yeah, so b6, pressure on e4. I wonder if is f5 ever played here? How does this work out? White's still better. Queen h5. Oh yeah, queen h5, right. Yeah, this is a really interesting game that you've sent, Gimmick. I don't know how to play these openings extremely well. I've never played a flank opening with the development of the queen's bishop. Knight f5, pawn takes. Yep, makes sense. The engine suggesting the f5. I want to really slow down on this position because this position is complicated. Maybe a6. I guess that's too passive. Tricky position, Gimmick. Yeah, no, I completely agree with your free lessons. I think free lessons is the way to go. I think relatively soon chess lessons are going to be completely free, and then I can go back to developing. But I wanted to do this for at least a little bit. Yeah. But anyways, f5 is better than d5, and what could white have done here? So I think both sides are gonna. The issue with the flank openings in general is that white's gonna end up with better center control and better better overall positions, more space. It's a modern opening, so white gets better center control and better spatial spatial advantage. I think play this extremely well. I mean, you basically get the needed undermining of white's center with breaks like c5 and d5. White can. The issue with basically modern openings in general is that white will just develop in a straightforward way, and it provides him a really easy plan. So he plays like knight f3, bishop d2, castles, rook to c1, queen probably to e1, and it's a very simple game for it's a very simple game for white to play. Yeah, Chiku, I'm very happy to try to help. Here's my biggest recommendation, Chiku, if you're 1350, is just do a lot of puzzles. Like yeah, tactics. It's really tactics at that level. The percentage of games that get determined by tactical play at like 1300 to 2000 is probably like 50%. I mean, it's really high. It's a really high percentage of games. So that's where I would recommend that you spend time to improve, Chikyu, is take whatever your preferred tactical study plan is. Either basically chess.com puzzle battle, chess.com puzzle rush, Lee chess, CT-ART, chess tempo. I mean, they all work. But the main idea is just to basically spend an hour or two on tactics a day for like a few months, and you really will see a noticeable difference. You will have to circle back and get a more complete understanding at a later point in time. But if you want to see a very quick improvement in the quality of your play, and something that will never be, it'll help you in every context. I would say Puzzle Rush. Yeah, if you just do Puzzle Rush for like 2 hours a day for like 3 months, the chances of that making you improve in a noticeable way, I think, are almost 100%. So that's why I advocate that over anything else. It's just work that you have to do on your own, and I can't help too much with that. But it's just the homework that needs to be done for you to improve effectively. Yeah, and keep having fun. Exactly. Stick with the game. A lot of people, if you stop playing, then your improvement stops. So it is also very important to continue to have fun. For me, tactics are legitimately really fun to do. I actually really like just sitting around and doing tactics, and having music on or the TV on in the background or something. It's just really fun for me to do in itself. I don't know how many for other people that's true, but for me, it's just fun to sit there and look at the combinations. Endgames are difficult. Something like Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual is a real classic. I think maybe there's Nick DeFermian Endgame book that's very good as well. But yeah, Endgames are Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual would be my recommendation there. But it's up to you. Basic chess openings or basic chess endgames I find is good. Or Silman. That's who I'm thinking of. I keep saying DeFermian, but it's Silman who wrote those books. I've heard those are quite good. If you do that hour a day for Chikyu, I can't see. I think it's extremely likely you will improve. Just so many games at your level are determined by 1 and 2 move tactics. So I'm sort of stuck on this position. Overall, I think you played well. Sorry, just to go back to Gimmick's game. Sorry to keep getting sidetracked talking about stuff, but I really like the way that you played this. I think you improved your positions, your pieces effectively. I'm looking for things to improve. I'm going to like the inaccuracies, like what was inaccurate about this game. And it seems pretty small stuff. Yeah, I mean, the inaccuracies generally come after the game is decided, not really too much. I think it was a great a great demonstration of a successful modern play. Again, I'm not a huge fan of modern strategies in general. Like giving your opponent advantages with the idea of undermining them seems risky to me. But I think that overall it'll be overall I think this was an excellent. The execution on this game was excellent. D5, I guess, D5 is a little worse in the sense that it doesn't, it's a 1 pawn difference from F5, which is an impossibly, not impossibly, but a very complicated. Thank you, Gimmick. I'm looking for things advice to give you on this, and it's a very solidly played game. The thing that they call a mistake, D5, is a move that seems pretty intuitive to me. And basically, is bad relative to this computer line F5. The computer's advocating this line, which is really very really rough to play as black. yeah, maybe it's a little bit of an overextension, maybe with knight f6 here. But overall, generally, yeah, generally very accurate. The errors, the inaccuracies come after the game is decided, and overall, I just think you played a very strong game and deserve to deserve a win. Solid positional play. F5 is a really crazy move, but the engine the engine has it calculated all the way down to the end. So I don't know, maybe knight e7. Maybe knight e7 and then f5. Like, maybe this could be an idea. Like, I don't know, f5 here. But overall, I think it's a pretty good game. Just go, keep. Yeah, f5 is a pretty rough game to play. But yeah, it's just a rough, difficult move to play. If you're getting that opening position, I'd like to see it tried now that you know it. Right? Let's just go through this line again, and we'll move on to the next game. f5, pawn takes, bishop takes, queen h5, king f8 here. So the actual move was f5, bishop takes. I guess all the pawn takes moves are lost then. So pawn takes, bishop takes, queen h5, king f8. And basically you're up 3 or 4 pawns here. So that was the refutation of takes. So I guess takes is this actually looks like this actually looks like a line that works out pretty well for black on taking. For some reason I played through something that was way riskier before. Bishop takes g2, queen h5, and you have pretty straightforward win with king f8. F5 here. And the best plays are not pawn takes is not the best play. So f5. I think you're okay. I played g6. Yeah. So I made an error here. I think basically queen h5, king f8, and you have a reasonably easy to play game, right? Or g6 here. But with pawn takes f5, bishop takes g2, you have a game that's straightforward to play. King f8, and now you're good. This should be a win for black. So maybe f5 isn't as risky as maybe f5 is a legitimate improvement and it's not as risky as it looks. Next move you can play g6 potentially or knight f6. But yeah, maybe f5 really does offer kind of a reasonable sound improvement to e4 here. Yeah, interesting. I played it through wrong the first time, so that's my bad. But f5 does actually seem to be a legitimate improvement. Not if you play it out the way that I played it through the first time, but if you do it and play king f8 on queen to h5, then you're good. All right, legit improvement. So yeah, disregard my g6 move. That was the wrong move for black. F5 is legitimately better than d5. But otherwise, excellent game. I really had to struggle to even find that, and I did it wrong the first time. So, anyways. Yeah, I do. I stream twice a day for 3 hours, Chiku. I stream every day at 10 a.m. Eastern and 6:05 p.m. Eastern. Today is a rare exception. I'm going to a baseball game with Jen, and I don't normally but I normally stream very consistently twice a day, at 10 a.m. Eastern and 6:05 p.m. Eastern. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much, Gimmick, for sending in that game. We have one final game. It's I think it might be Willem's game, but let me just take a look. It might also be, unless I might have done this incorrectly. I may not have another game lined up. Okay, no, I do. It's Miscalculations game. Cool. Awesome. I will take a look at this. Okay, cool. On to the next one. Yeah, so this is Miscalculations game playing as white. D5, D4, bishop G2. Not familiar with this opening, but looks okay. Here I would play probably bishop to f4. That looks solidest. But yeah, Tory attack. Not an opening I'm super familiar with, but one that I should be able to get to learn a little bit better. So knight f3, d5, d4, knight f6, and then c4 looks reasonable. Bishop g5 looks sort of aggressive. I think bishop g5 might not be objectively that good. I think knight e4 sort of puts a lot of pressure on knight f6. But yeah, bishop f4 and white should be all right. Bishop g5, bishop takes. I think white's fine. Yeah, okay. So let's slow this down. Knight f3, bishop g5 is already probably failing that opening test that we were looking at. Bishop g5 probably is right on the edge of whether or not that's a good opening or not. Bishop g5 is well down the list and objectively shifts the game about half a point against white. So I would look to other openings first. This is on the verge of what is and is not playable. c4 and then maybe bishop g5. But bishop g5 here and knight plays to e4, and white plays back to bishop f4. Overall here, this offers white equality. I think that's probably not good enough to justify it as a mainline opening. But e3, sure. This all looks fine. Transposes into something relatively reasonable. I think white gets a rough position after this. This bishop on a3 is causing problems with castling. In order to fix that, you're probably going to have to play knight e5, knight to d3. And yeah, white's going to be fine. I think white's going to be fine. It's not good, but is a playable game. In terms of changing this game around, pawn takes, sure. And basically, I think this gets tricky. So where's really the error for black or for white? I think the error for white is hanging the queen on d6. Yeah, that'll do it. So this offers a very the game is tactically decided after white's queen to d6. If you play queen to d6, I think you're in trouble. There's not really much to be done there. White ends up basically losing to bishop takes. So yeah, I guess I would steer clear of that. In terms of improving this game, other than not hang, so the game gets hung. That's sort of the decisive moment. But here, I think the opening might be something to take a look at least. I think the Tory attack just isn't that good. It's not very effective, and there's not really much there that offers white much of an advantage. The engine, I guess, on second calculation gives you slightly better chances, but even after bishop f4 here, this just isn't that favorable to white. So c5, e3, knight c6, bishop b5. This just seems sort of mediocre. Not really very effective, and I don't want to. If you really know this theory well, if you feel like you're getting good positions out of it, then sure, by all means. But c4 is evaluated as half a pawn better, and it's 25 times as popular, 20 times as popular. So I guess I would say consider the Tory attack and see whether that's really what you want to be playing. Bishop f4, fine. Knight c3, bishop takes. Overall, I think white's sort of fighting an uphill battle here. Improvements for white here, I guess. e3 is fine. Knight c6, and then bishop b5 is a move that is really the big. Okay, so this game there's three things that I want to issue as sort of a takeaway here. I think queen d6 was not really that efficient. I think that was probably not the most precise way for white to play it. Queen d6, hangs the queen, so I think we're on the same page on that. The other issues are the other issues are whether bishop b whether Tory attack is a good opening to be played. If you're comfortable with it, then maybe it can be, but it seems to offer a quality in best case for white. And then the third one that I would say is bishop to b5. It does this put too much strain on white in terms of defending it. I think this is, bishop b5 is going to shift the eval pretty seriously towards black, and it does. Okay, cool. Good. Glad I'm thinking about it correctly. So bishop b5, and here, c3 is the response you want to play to queen a5, but you can't. Bishop b5, queen a5, knight c3, and white is good. Good stuff. Turns out, or at least out of the difficulty. Basically, white's going to have a positional disadvantage, and you want to avoid this entirely. But at least that sort of equalizes. Thank you very much for the follow, Singed. Appreciate it. Is the Alban counter gambit any good against e4? I don't know that one exactly, to be completely honest. I don't know him super well by name. Which one is that again? E4. Which? I literally I don't know the names. Is it? What? Do you mind sending me the move order? Like I wouldn't recognize it. I'm sure. I just don't know that one. I've played through it. It sounds very familiar, but I don't know the names off the top of my head super well. So yeah, thank you very much for the follow, Singed. Appreciate it. Thank you very much for joining the stream. But yeah, I think in general here, where does white misstep? Tory opening is already a stretch, and then bishop to b5 I think is not super playable. I think probably c3 here is generally solid. Knight d2 might be a good way to develop a piece effectively. But queen a5 means that white's going to be under too much pressure. And basically here, if this is the best tactical response, then white's in some difficulty. D4, d5. Okay, cool. D4, d5, c4, e5. All right. Sorry, I wasn't familiar with that one. But yeah, overall, that was the misstep, bishop to b5, and there wasn't really much to be done. This bishop a3 gives black a lasting positional compensation. So I think basically this, in terms of screening things out, this is another move that you can screen out of your opening repertoire. Assuming that you're comfortable with your Tory opening, you can look at, assuming that you're comfortable with your Tory opening, you can play, you have basically a number of good moves to be played. C3 is the main line, but bishop b5 fails the test on the metric of looking at the opening book and looking at the shifts in analysis. This shift in analysis should be enough of a red flag that you avoid that opening entirely. So c3 is better. Bishop e5. What are you gonna do? After that, it's you're doing your best, and white basically doesn't have much of an opportunity. But this ends up being basically slightly better for black in a consistent and lasting way. It's a playable game, but not a good one for white. So for that reason, I would consider screening out the Tory on that general move order, and then I would also so I'd screen out the Tory. I would also screen out bishop b5 in this opening theory, assuming that you're still playing the Tory at that point. So bishop b5, queen a5. This bishop b5 is the issue. It shifts the eval about 1.5 points, and it shifts this opening towards black, and it's not in the opening book as well. So that should fit that that should fit that criteria. Thank you very much for sending the game in miscalculation. Always happy to take a look, and please keep sending games. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for contributing material to the stream, And overall, good stuff. Thank you very much for sending it. So yeah, bishop b5 is the misstep. This would fail the test, the screening test of openings. So yeah, interesting. And let's just take a look at the Albin counter gambit, and then we'll close out. D4, D5, C4, E5, and basically white's white's in good shape here. Ideas like D takes C5 are okay. D takes C5 is good. D4 is, I think, objectively black's best response. Knight F3, but this shouldn't be too much of a challenge to white. This does lead to a yeah, I mean, this does basically lead to a situation in which white has gotten black to gambit a pawn, and the D4 pawn is also somewhat of a liability. I don't know it super well. Would you like me to add it to a specific day, Chikyu? Because I could do that. Want to take a look at the Albin counter gambit on May 14th at 10 a.m.? I'll just add it just since I think it's interesting material. I don't know it super well, and we can spend a little bit of time going through it. Yeah, no, I don't know it super well. It's not something that I played. I haven't been a D4 player really much. So yeah. We'll take a look at that, Chikyu, and then cover it on May 14th at 10 a.m. Eastern. That will be what we'll take a look at on that day. But adding it to the list, and we'll have that material there. So thank you very much for sending the games and sending the lesson ideas, everybody. I really appreciate it. Thanks all for being here. And the next stream is tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern. No stream tonight, because I'm going out, but 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning, and all should be basically all should be back on schedule. Cool. Yeah, King's Indian works too. No, thank you very much for the lesson, Chikyu. This lesson will be on at the same time tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Eastern time in the United States. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much for spending the time and for contributing material to the stream. I really appreciate it, and yeah, awesome stuff. Hope to see you again tomorrow. Have a good one, everyone. Have a good day. Thanks a lot. Bye.